You're welcome back. The Federal Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development has been working with the United Nations Industrial Development Organization, that's UNIDO, to develop master plans for establishing staple crop processing zones in 6 geopolitical regions of the country. This is expected to address all supply-side constraints and improve Nigeria's competitiveness in selected agro-value chains. The staple crop processing zones are a flagship program of Nigeria's agricultural transformation agenda, which has the objective of creating wealth and employment in the agribusiness sector. We have someone who is playing in that area. He's the Chief Executive Officer of Analysing, Chuka Modi, in the studio with us. Good morning, Mr. Modi. Thank you so much for your time this morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
So sometimes it feels like the government is doing some things that are supposed to be working with the private sector.
Yes.
We don't know how much involvement we have the private sector involved. Do you know about this program? And if yes, how involved are you in it?
Yes, we certainly know about the program. The program is one of the flagship programs of the AFDB, the African Development Bank, and they're working in conjunction with the federal government of Nigeria. So yes, we're very well aware of it, but we're not at the present time involved in the AFDB program. LLX PLC is pursuing its own initiative on the staple crop processing zone framework.
Okay, but this, I know you mentioned the AFDB. AFDB is also contributing because
yes.
I do see that there's some monies that the World Bank has committed $100 million to sustainable institutions and infrastructure in the zone.
Yes.
AFDB has committed 152. But I mean, back home, it's supposed to be founded on the Federal Ministry of Agriculture.
Yes.
And they're supposed to be working with investors and farmers and people in the value chain. So is it that they don't reach out, or you guys just want to work on your own?
No, it's not that. I think it's important to understand the actual framework in terms of how they want it needs to be implemented. So the AFDB has earmarked a significant amount of financing for investment in staple crop processing zones, but the AFDB financing comes via the federal government and the Federal Ministry of Agriculture. Essentially, the key is the intention is to boost food production significantly in 18 staple crops, which they're dedicated to doing: cassava, millet, sorghum, which are most of the crops that we're doing. But the AFDB program with the federal government is going through the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Agriculture. Because we're a purely private company, we're doing this on our own initiative in Adani in Enugu State. So the particular initiatives with the AFDB and the federal government are PPP driven. So it's meant to be finding a private sector stakeholder who can manage the actual facilities in the staple crop processing zone, manage the infrastructure, manage the processing facilities in conjunction with the federal government. So that's very different from what we're doing at LLX. It's exactly the same initiative, but the framework is different. We're a wholly private company.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I know you're a private company, and that's why I was hoping that...
Well, I should say public company since we're publicly listed, but we're in the private sector. In the private sector, yes.
In the private sector, yes. I mean, that's what you mean, and that's what you're... But, one would have thought that, since you're a private company in that area, then, we would see a coordination, between both, because obviously the government's, as you said, it's a PPP project.
Yeah.
So
it's
even
meant
if
to be a PPP
it's
project.
meant to be a PPP project. So even if the AFDB and the World Bank are giving funds into it, it's going to be managed by mostly, the private sector, and that's how it be. And because it's the private sector that are mostly involved in the chain, in the value chain, in the different crops, staple crops that we're talking about. So would you say this is, or is it just you that is not interested in this?
I would not say we're not interested. From a policy perspective, whatever the DFIs are doing, whatever the federal government is doing, we're interested in keen into what they're doing. I think it has to be a collaborative effort. I think generally it's been a collaborative effort so far. The difficulty is trying to manage the interaction between the public sector players and the public sector and the private sector players being coordinated by the Central Bank of Nigeria. But I think given that it takes a while for government policy to come into fruition and then be implemented in a practical sense. We're plowing our own furrow, to use a farming metaphor. And I think it's not mutually exclusive going the route we're going down and also collaborating with the government at a later time when they're ready for it. So I don't think there's any particular disconnect between what we're doing and what the government is doing. It can be collaborative. I think we need to collaborate with the government and work with them because government policy translates into more efficiency for us and economic growth and prosperity. But I think it's important that we also try to carry out our own initiatives.
Yeah, well, of course, it's important. We can't all wait for the government. Yes. But I think what I hear you say is the government needs to reach out more to the private sector because having the great ideas and having the funding, especially from the international institutions, may not be enough. But actually bringing those things, and making the people feel the impact, you need a lot of collaboration from the private sector.
Very true, very true. When you say making the people feel the impact, I think that's where you need that intermediation between private sector companies like ourselves and the government and then the smallholder farmers. Because what we're doing in Adani, for instance, is we have a lot of outgrowers and a lot of in-growers who are actually growing on our land and then we're off-taking from them. So there's the public sector initiative at one end, which leads to, low interest funding, which leads to developmental style finance. But of course, they need us as the intermediation to work with the lower end subsistence farmers on the retail side. So that's exactly what we're doing. So I think it's important that we work together on this.
What about the terms of entry? Because I remember when I had a conversation on economic zones.
Yes.
Example, the one in Lekki and spread all over.
Zones, yeah. Free trade zones.
Yeah. Some of the terms that I learned from that was it's not that easy. Yes. Sometimes it's more profitable for you to just stay on your own and provide your infrastructure and whatever you can provide because getting into the zone, the terms of entry are very demanding.
They're demanding, yes. They're capital intensive also. But I think it is important and necessary to have the government side involved because providing our own infrastructure is certainly not possible from the point of view of you need roads, infrastructure, feeder roads. That's the work of government. And I think it's going to be possible for private sector companies to actually start to develop their own external infrastructure. In terms of internal infrastructure, certainly we have irrigation in our farms, roads in the farms, processing facilities, so we have a rice mill. And so I think the value addition to the crops in terms of processing internally and processing infrastructure is for the private sector players. But in terms of the major infrastructure to enable the scaling up, that's work of the government.
Yeah, well, of course, it's the work of the government to make the environment conducive for investors, to get in and put some money. But there's also the area of preservation. In my last conversation, we touched on that. And so this is harvest season. You have a lot of crops that come out and they're available and all of that. But in a couple of months, you don't see them anymore. So you talk of warehousing and preservation and all. I know you're involved in the processing, but I want to believe it's also an area that is close to what you're doing. Perhaps we can get you to invest in preservation and warehousing of some of those tomatoes and pepper and yam, so that when they're off season, and corn especially, corn is surging now, for preservation and warehousing.
That's all within the agri value chain in how we process efficiently, preservation, silos, and I think one has to take a holistic look at it. So if you don't have infrastructure, proper road infrastructure, it's difficult to get crops from the farm gate to the market. And so there's destruction of value in that intervening period. But of course, you need to have power. You need to have a low inflation environment in order to finance facilities for processing, for preservation also. So I think one has to take a holistic look at these things. It can't be done in isolation. And that's the point of a whole processing zone, that you're looking at all these various aspects within one ecosystem.
So we go back to the issue of infrastructure.
Yes.
But even in the infrastructure, government has we have the PPP arrangement and all of that, and maybe we need to push more on that.
Yeah, I think look, it's not possible for the public sector finances as they stand at the present time to carry out the needed infrastructure improvements across Nigeria. So I think you have the Sukuk bonds that are being used to to build roads. But if you look at
the infrastructure credits, yes.
But if you look at the size of the infrastructure deficit in Nigeria, it is not possible to fund it primarily from the size of the current budget. So I think you're going to have to look at significant financing going forward in order to fix roads, in order to fix power.
So it comes back to the private sector.
I don't think so. I think it's if the government is raising, say, finance through bonds or fixed income instruments on the markets, yes, you need private sector involvement. But I think from a policy perspective and implementation perspective and the financing, it's primarily a government responsibility.
Yeah, government drives it.
Yes. Yeah.
Government.
That's part of.
But are we making? I mean, we have a lot of initiatives. We have the the PPP arrangements where we've seen a corporate like Dangote, cashing in on that.
Yes.
Are we making progress? Can we see this infrastructure? Are we moving forward? Can we see it?
I think there's slow but incremental change, and I think the key thing is to start moving in the right direction, and that's a function of government policy. It's difficult, it's been very slow, but I think the key thing is once we start moving in the right direction, then we can start to see progress.
And electricity is another area. I think we'll be having a conversation on renewable energy. That's also one area people are going to now, since the national grid may not be able to accommodate, all of the need that we are. Well, thank you so much. You want to say something?
No.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Mr. Chikamwadi, the Chief Executive Officer of Analysing PLC. We wish you the best in your processing zone. And we do hope that we will get more agricultural produce out there, especially for exports, to help our foreign exchange. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you very much.
All right.